Greetings, everyone. Those of you tuning in, Facebook or YouTube, can you just let me know in the chat if this is working? This is our first time doing it through this platform, and just want to make sure that we are good before we start the interview. It looks like YouTube is not working, but Facebook is live. So we'll figure that out. Anyway, again, greetings. My name is Martin, and I serve as a pastor to Risen Church if you are new. And what we're doing today is called an All of Life interview. Here at Risen, we believe that all of life is all for Jesus. As followers of Jesus, Jesus is working in and through every part of our lives. There's nothing within the human experience, the good, the bad, the ugly, the mundane, and even everything in between, that God is not concerned with and involved with. And so our hope during these interviews, and for those who call Risen their home, you've seen many of these interviews live, but we'll begin to record them and have them online. And so our goals are threefold. First, it's to acknowledge and to respond to the Lordship of Jesus for all of life. We like to say at Risen that our story makes sense in God's story. And so one of our tasks then is to know that story, God's story, and learn how we fit in God's story. Secondly, we want to affirm the goodness of a broad range of vocations as opportunities to glorify God and to love our neighbors. We believe that every single one of us have unique callings and are the means by which we get to participate in God's story and what God is doing in this world. So our work has the capacity to love God and to love neighbor. Third, it's just a way for us to get to know one another. For those who call Risen their home, it's a way for us to connect and get to know one another at a deeper level through our unique callings and vocations, through our work. Now, we use the word vocation very broadly. We define it more robustly. Vocation is not just the work that you get paid to do, because we can wear many titles. For example, myself, my professional vocation is that I'm a pastor, but I'm also called to be a father to my two daughters, and I'm a husband to my wife, Angela. So I'm a husband, I'm a pastor, I'm a dad. Those are my unique vocational callings that I have. Another easy way to think about our vocation is what we're passionate about, or where do we invest a lot of our time and energy in, again, paid or unpaid. So for today's All of Life interview, and in light of Mental Health Awareness Month, I'm interviewing Heather Piedrahita, who has a unique vocational calling related to mental health. So Heather, welcome to the All of Life interview. How are you?
Good, how are you? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you for saying yes to this.
Thanks for having me.
I know we've talked a lot in the past about obviously your story, and even walked alongside parts of it with you, and so I just appreciate I think the courage that it takes for you to say yes to this, because your unique story has a lot to do with hard topics of mental health, loss, and grief. And so before we begin, I just want to say, yeah, thank you for telling your story. So I want to just jump right in. Is that cool?
That's great. Yes.
Okay. Now, professionally, you are a transitional specialist. You help folks transition from, and correct me if I get this wrong, military life to, I guess, civilian life, helping them find jobs or maybe pursue other professional endeavors. Is that accurate?
Yes. I work for an organization called Hire Heroes USA.
Okay.
So we work with military, veterans, and spouses to find meaningful civilian employment. So I do a lot of resume writing, interview prep, really just helping people to see the value and the skills they already have, and then how they can apply them in a new environment. So that's one of my vocations for sure.
How's that been?
It's been good. The way we're set up was always entirely virtual anyway. So our services didn't change. If anything, we've like delivered the same and above and beyond in this time. And I think it's just been helpful for people to know that there's somebody they can rely on to get that help, that work is, still out there and can be found, and that there's support when they need it.
Very cool. Yeah. So that's one, well, your main professional vocation.
That's the one I get paid for anyway.
That's the one you get paid to and spend a lot of time during the week doing. And then another calling that you have, and this is kind of where really I want to unpack today and would love for you to speak into, is you have you consider yourself, and you have a whole Instagram account regarding this. You consider yourself life as nobody's wife, right? This is another piece of your vocational calling. What is life as nobody's wife, and how would you describe your vocation? Yeah.
Good question. So in thinking about this interview in general and thinking about vocations and like the things that we are called to, some of them are chosen, right? Like I choose the work that I do for Higher Heroes USA. I choose, I very consciously chose to be a mom. And I feel like that's a huge part of myself and one of my unpaid vocations.
Yeah.
And then, some vocations or some callings we don't choose.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where this one came in for me. I am a widow. I was widowed at 32. And my first husband, Stephen, was, the love of that part of my life. And we met as teenagers, kind of children. Now, when I look back on it, I'm like, oh my goodness. But, we really then kind of got to know each other as we grew up, became adults, eventually, got married and had 2 boys, and built a whole life together. He was active duty Navy. He was a corpsman, and he did a couple of tours overseas, one in Iraq and one in Afghanistan. And, he brought a lot back from that mentally. And I knew that initially when he first came back, and then a lot more of it came to life later. He unfortunately had, PTSD, which then really triggered depression and a lot of anxiety, and unfortunately did not get that treated for a very long time. Probably it was about 9.5, 10 years before he finally kind of confronted it. And then there was about 1.5 years of a fight, like truly a battle, through his mental illness, and just trying to overcome that. He died by suicide in April of 2019, so just over 2 years ago, which is how I became a widow. And it took me a while to really even associate myself with the word widow. Yeah. Because I've been a wife and a partner for so long. That was such a key part of my identity. It might have even been like 2 months before I heard that word and realized that I was that, because we also have a picture of a widow as somebody who's like 85, 90 and like gray haired and hunched over. And I hope to be that person someday. I really do. But that's not who I am now. And so, I was like, what does this mean to be a widow and to not be his wife? And so kind of figuring out like, what does life after Stephen look like? Who am I when I lost one of my vocations as a wife?
Right.
What does that look like? And then how do I feel called to share what I've learned through this horrible process and huge loss? How do I feel called to share that and hopefully help others?
Yeah.
And some of that is definitely related to mental health and supporting others through mental health crises or trauma. But I wasn't the one with the mental illness. And so a piece that's really come out of that, even bigger than mental health too, is like grief and loss. And how do I share about that and be honest about that, even on a platform like Instagram that really is not, is all happy-go-lucky. But I do feel called. That's kind of the vocation, is I feel called to share about that part of my life.
Yeah. When you're talking about, the different titles that you wear or that we wear, and even for yourself, from being a wife and then not want it, nobody wants to be a widow. Nobody wants, but some of these callings we find ourselves in, and sometimes it's hard to make sense of it, but it's part of God's story, and don't have time to unpack how all that kind of makes sense. And oftentimes it doesn't make sense, but it is a place where sometimes we find ourselves in, and this is where you find yourself in, but you felt compelled to tell the story, to be public about it, and to be honest about it. And first of all, I just want to say thank you for that, because part of the reason why we're having this conversation is to help destigmatize sentiments around mental health. Even for myself, and even in my own journey, I think it's an area where I'm really trying to recover, and trying to learn, and trying to take more seriously my own mental health and those around me. I mean, as a pastor, I want to shepherd people and come alongside people holistically, right? Not in just a spiritual sense, but even as we began, Jesus is a God of all of life, right? The spiritual and the physical, and that we are embodied beings, that we're not just spiritual beings, but we have to care for our physical body, we have to care for our mental, obviously, and emotional health. And I think callings like yours, who are willing to talk about it and be public about it, I think is helpful, destigmatize, and helps not just the church, but I think culture at large begin to deal with it more in a more healthy way. And your particular calling, this particular vocation as nobody's life as nobody's wife, I put it in the category of compassionate work and even redemptive work, because while it's work that's birthed out of brokenness, we're reminded in the gospel that God takes broken things and restores them, and deals with it. God doesn't move away from brokenness, but moves into it. And this is something that you've chosen. You've decided to move towards an area of your life that was hard, and still hard. It's not over. It's something that you live with, that you learn to live with loss and grief, as you and I have even talked about before. And so, yeah, I think of your vocation in the area of compassionate work, redemptive work. And I think it helps with some of your work with the professional side, right? I mean, you get to deal with a lot of folks who have experienced similar things that Stephen has experienced. And so you're not helping just in a professional sense. You get to help people beyond that. So anything else that you would add or mention there?
No, I mean, I think you're right. I think it's definitely, it is, I'm glad that you mentioned, like, it is ongoing, right? And I think that's a huge part of something that I thought about when I started the Instagram, is because I was like, well, what is my intention with this? How long is this really going to be a thing? And I realized that grief isn't something that goes away. The very acute grief, the overwhelming grief, yes, tapers off over time. But, we all have grief. We all have loss.
Right.
And we very rarely are willing to confront it or be in it. And then even if we're in it, it takes then another big step to share it and let someone else in it with you. And so, I realize that that's, it really is a vulnerable place for me to go, to let other people into that part. My hope is that then it encourages people to do the same, and to share those griefs, because we all have them. We aren't all, just on happy family vacations every day on Instagram. Like there's other pieces of our lives that we're feeling at the same time. And so, just keeping that relevant and prevalent.
Yeah. Okay, second question that I want to ask is, as an image bearer of God, how does being, life as nobody's wife, how does this particular calling, how does this work reflect some aspect of who God is? So I guess connecting this calling, connecting this being life as nobody's wife to the person of God, how does it reflect God?
I think for me, the way that I see it as a reflection. It is healing, it's redemptive, like you said, but I think it's a reality that God sees and acknowledges our grief and our loss too.
Yeah.
And that he's with us in that too. You know, it's really easy to see God on like a sunny day at the beach and be like, thank you, God, for this beautiful day. Like that's easy. And it's hard to really like, you know, feel God there when things feel terrible. And yet at the same time, like if you pause long enough, I have felt God more in those moments than in some of the happiest moments of my life, because I really truly felt that I was not alone. And I think, you know, I think there's a reality check when you have a big loss or a shocking loss or both, that we have all lost at some point in our life, right? Whether maybe it's a death, but maybe it's a divorce or a miscarriage or bankruptcy or any other kind of loss. We have all lost. And I'm here to be the like Debbie Downer for a minute, but if you haven't, you will. Like there's not a way to be human and just have everything perfect forever. And I learned that because I mean, at 32, I hadn't had any of those other things on that list. I hadn't had any big losses. And then Stephen died. And so, you know, I realized that I didn't know loss. I didn't know grief. I had no idea what to do with it. But God did, right? Like God was there. God was already acquainted with grief, having lost his own son, having given his own son, right? And so I wasn't coming into something completely lost, but I did have to learn how to lean back on him to get me through it. And so I think the part too that I come back to though is that like God is there, God's in the grief, he's in the loss. He's also not like, stay there, be sad, be miserable, life is terrible. Like that's not the message of the Bible. And please correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the one with the vocational call. That's not my
You're good so far. Keep going. You're good.
But I've never gotten the message that God's like, the world's terrible, you're terrible. That's not where he's coming from and how he loves us. And so it is that he's there in the grief and the loss, but the healing, the redemptive piece is that like he sees us out and then he's still there, you know? And so just understanding that piece. And I think, you know, reflecting that to others. So when others are in grief or in loss, like being there in it with them, it's not always easy to do. And then sticking with them and seeing them through the healing. And I'm, you know, so thankful for the people that have come alongside me to do that, because it's tough. It's not an easy place to be, and it takes a lot of a person to do that. But you know, those people really reflect God's work to me, and you know, that's what I try and hope to do on a little Instagram page.
You touched on something with grief that I think is so important. That, well, when we think of grief, like what value does it have, right? And I get it. I mean, it's hard, especially what we grieve. But what if we thought of it in light of a God who is acquainted with grief? When I think of you and your Instagram and your posts and this particular calling of yours, and when you talk about your experience in attempt to help others grieve and loss and their journey with mental health and pain and suffering, I'm reminded, Heather, that God did that. As you've said, he understands and knows grief intimately. And you, I think, highlighted places where it shows this with God. One, God the Father knows what it's like to lose a son to death. God knows that intimately. And then God, through the person of Jesus as the Son, the story of John 11 depicts an image of God in Jesus, where Jesus cries. He's in tears because he's lost a friend, his best friend, and Jesus is grieving. And many of us know the story as one of the shortest passages in the English translation. Jesus wept, Jesus weeping over Lazarus. And the text just says Jesus wept, but if we study that text a little bit deeper, it's actually more of like a wail, like a loud cry. And sometimes it's hard for us to see or understand or picture God or Jesus feeling deep brokenness and loss and grieving over loved ones like that. But that's who God is.
Yeah.
A God who is so acquainted with sorrow and pain. And again, your redemptive, compassionate calling, I think you answered it well, reflects that aspect, the compassionate eyes of God over brokenness. And then third question, how does your perspective, right, this unique vantage point that you have, how does your perspective as a widow, as life is nobody's wife, give you a unique vantage point into the brokenness of the world? You kind of alluded to it, just that, when you've gone through a certain type of grief, you have eyes for that type of grief that other people are experiencing. When you start talking about it, then people start, a community comes about. Yeah, how does your perspective give you a unique vantage point into the brokenness of the world?
Yeah, this question for me, I think this one definitely goes back to thinking about mental health and understanding the brokenness of the illness, right? Like mental illness is really how I see how with my own eyes, saw Stephen suffer was with an illness that he fought against, that he sought treatment for, that he took medication for, that he saw professionals for, right? Just like you would with cancer, right? You would go to every doctor, every specialist, take everything they tell you to take. And so I saw the brokenness of that illness and what it does to a body and a mind. And then throughout that process and after his death, I came to understand the brokenness of how we react to it, right? How we of the world react to the mental illness in a broken way.
Say more.
Yeah. Because, I mean, it's not something that's easy to understand.
Yeah.
If you have cancer, there are tests they can run to say, see, it's here, and this is what that means. So much of mental illness is based on the sick person being able to describe how they feel and what's going on. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of not knowing what to say or what to do. And I think that's what leads to a lot of the stigma and not knowing how to handle it. And so I think that I see the brokenness through the way that we understand or don't understand mental illness, and then how we react to a death by suicide, right? If I was sitting here saying my husband died by cancer, nobody would expect me to whisper that, right? I would that's how he died, because he had cancer and he went to every specialist and he took every medication and he died from his cancer.
Yeah.
But when you take out cancer and you insert mental illness and you say they died by suicide, there's understandably a shock and no one knows what to say. And I guess, the brokenness of it is that we don't lean into it enough to figure out what we can say or shouldn't say. I don't know that there's always a right thing to say. So maybe there's a piece for people listening to know that, like, there's not anything you can say that's going to make it better in that moment. There's sometimes things you can say that make it worse. But I think the brokenness of it is just that, like, this is something of this world, right? This is a human condition. And, God loves us as humans. He created us as humans. He wants us to feel fully human. And some of that is leaning into this brokenness. And I mean, a piece of it is understanding that there may not be a solution to it. There may not be an answer. Not that we're meant to know on this side of heaven anyway. So sitting with the unknown and not having the answers, which, man, for someone like me, I want to have it all figured out. And so leaning into the brokenness of, like, I don't get to know, like, okay, God, this is on you. You have the answers on this, and I may not know, and that's okay. But yeah, it's definitely a vantage into, I think mental health is the biggest piece that comes out of that for me.
Yeah. Not everyone's called to talk about their experiences, and part of it is some of the history that we have that you've mentioned, where we just haven't been good at talking about it. But the reality is not everyone's called to talk about it.
True.
But the reality of brokenness, at Risen, we like to say the unraveling of shalom in all of life is touches all of life, right? Not only, what sin does, not only unravels shalom or peace between us and God, but it unravels shalom between peace with ourselves. So that can happen physically, emotionally, mentally, relationally, right? Sin unravels shalom with our relationships with another, with the way we relate to the world and the way we relate to creation. And so we need people who, in one sense, have gone through, these particular sufferings and brokenness to help us, deal with because, like you said, on this side of heaven, this is the reality. This is what we live with. And so we're grateful for counselors, and we're grateful for those who have written books and podcasts, who do this professionally, but also for people like you who, this wasn't a calling that you sought after. This is just the part of your story, and you choose to speak honestly and truthfully about it. And
I think like a piece of it too is, I never want to feel like I'm speaking on behalf of Stephen. I'm not here to tell his story because I can't. I wasn't in his head. But there's a certain element of, what I have seen, and there's more that we can do when people are suffering mentally, when people are, not well mentally. And so, leaning into that and looking at, what are our options? How do we support our community, love each other, love our families, our friends, our neighbors, because that's a time when people need help. And it, there's a rallying around death by suicide, as there should be, because it is traumatic and it's a complicated loss. But there's not the same rallying around mental illness, and so it's like we're coming in too late. And that's why I'm happy to speak in Mental Health Awareness Month. Suicide Prevention Month is tough for me because I feel like if we're not doing enough in this month, that's why we need the other month.
Right.
And so let's catch it earlier. Let's embrace this brokenness and understand that there may not be an answer, but there's something better. There's more that we can come into here. In terms of not speaking on behalf of Stephen, I think what I can say is that I saw his love for Christ. I saw his love of God, and I saw the way he prayed and prayed and prayed and poured into that as, again, another way to try and help himself out. And so, I never want anybody to look at mental health as a lack of spiritual faith or a lack of faith. It is a spiritual crisis. I will say that it certainly is, but I never want anybody to look at it as like, oh, he must not have believed. He must not have really given it all. He didn't give it all to God. Hey, maybe he could have prayed harder. I don't know. I'm only speaking from my own perspective, but from what I saw, no, there's no way. And so that's something we have to remember and be willing to accept that it's still can happen no matter what, even for those who have given it all.
No, I have to affirm that. I got to walk alongside him myself, pastoring him for a short season, but being able to talk to him about his excitement for faith, and I might lose it talking about this, but just
me too.
having had planned talking about baptizing him and the ways that God was speaking to him, and so I think it is so important that you say that, because I affirm that, and it's absolutely true. That we should never question someone's faith when it comes to dying by suicide. And I celebrate his faith and what God was doing in and through his life. It was so real, and it's so exciting in so many ways. So thank you for bringing that up. I just reminded even just my own relationship and journey alongside him in that. We had a lot of great conversations. He had a lot of great questions about faith, and I love it. He was so honest about the things that, you know, he was unsure about and the things he was excited about, and he got me all riled up and excited about the things that God was doing. So
yeah, no, and I think that's something that I've always felt safe doing, especially here at Risen. But I think like reminding ourselves that like talking about the brokenness of the world or our own human condition is not a matter of questioning God, right? Like we are allowed to question, we can wonder, we can like ask anything and everything, because personally my God can take it, right? And so if they can't, maybe think that part through. But I think like, you know, I think, you know, it's a safe place to ask questions about faith. And I saw that in him as a way to really try and explore his own faith, like the rest of us do, you know, and some people are brave enough to ask it out loud. But I think we all have times that we like, God, where are you in this? You know? And yeah, he had a lot of good questions about that. And, you know, I've had quite a few since then too. And I'm thankful for this community that has reaffirmed my belief and held me up when those come.
That's good. Okay, last question.
Okay.
And it's a lot of these questions overlap, but so Jesus commands us to love our neighbor as ourselves. Let me bring up the question. There we go. How does your work, how does life as nobody's wife, how does your grief, how does your journey function as an opportunity to love and serve others? Most people assume that the command to love neighbor is mostly applied as a sort of interpersonal act of kindness. However, we can demonstrate that love through indirect and systemic ways. So you do it by, you know, just sharing your story like this, and I don't know how wide the reach is and how many people will listen to this, but in a way, that's a systemic way of kind of loving people, or even your posts, and or just coming alongside another person who's, you know, maybe have experienced the same thing. But yeah, how does your grief function as an opportunity to love and serve others?
Yeah, I think you're right. The tendency is to take that love our neighbors as ourselves like very literally. Like I should bake banana bread for my neighbor and take it over there because then they'll know I love them. And that's great. And if you're my neighbor, feel free, because I'm all about it. But I think that like loving our neighbor in this world in 2021, our neighbors across the world are still connected to us, right? Like if we're live on Facebook or YouTube, we could be seen anywhere in the world right now. And those people are like become our neighbors.
Right.
So, you know, I do, as cheesy as it sounds, I do think of the Instagram as an act of love and service, because it gets that message out there, and it makes anyone and everyone my neighbor. It then has created this community of grievers. I don't know, community of people who are either in grief or going through grief. And it makes it a safe thing to talk about.
But that's it. Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh yeah, go ahead. You're good.
Well, I mean, I think that's it. Like your experience has allowed you to kind of reimagine, in one sense, broad neighbors, like anybody that's, you know, reading any of your posts or listening to this or any of your past interviews. But then for you, your particular neighbor is someone who grieves. You're thinking of someone who has experienced loss and mental health and pain. And I love one of your posts where you wrote an open letter to those caring for Vanessa Bryant. You had her in mind, but then you also had those caring for her. I want to read it because I think this is just so good. And I think this is such an act of love and kindness. Here's what you wrote. You wrote, and for those who don't know who Vanessa Bryant is, she is married to Kobe Bryant and his wife, his daughter Gigi, and 9 others died in a helicopter crash a little over a year ago, and so obviously devastating. And so to another wife or widow, to another mom who has lost a loved one, you wrote this to her, indirectly to her, but and then to those caring for her. You wrote, "Let her cry, let her rage, let her lash out, let her moan and scream in agony when the emotional pain comes through as physical pain that just has to get out one way or another. Let her talk, let her question, let her sit in silence and just think. Sit with her, but don't pass the time with your questions, and don't fill the silence with what you think is helpful. It likely isn't. Don't tell her everything happens for a reason. Don't tell her you know how she's feeling. Don't tell her they are in a better place now. Don't even tell her God has a plan, because right now she is in the worst place possible with so many broken plans. She didn't want to hear that. She can't hear that. Not yet. Bring her meals, give her permission to rest, and hold her baby while it fusses. Sweep the floor, make the beds, and walk the dog. Yes, she probably has people to do these things, but it will mean so much for you to do them. And please, I pray someone swoop in to the deal with the paperwork of death. Someone else plan the memorial. Someone else control the media. Because as much as she's had a public life up to this point, it is amplified 1,000 times, and her heart doesn't need extra pressure right now. Then stay with her through the next 6, 9, 12 months and more as she processes these losses too big to describe in words. Life will go on, and this won't always be the top of the story of the day, but it will be the top of the story for her for a while. Be there. Be a listening ear, a place to vent, and a source of encouragement. Be kind, be patient, be a friend. Heather, can I just tell you how helpful that is, even for someone who's not caring for Vanessa, but someone who wants to pastor well those who grieve and those who've experienced loss and those who, live with, those struggling with mental health and emotional health. This is an act of kindness to me. This served me, and I hope others who are reading this in a deep way. Like, this is so helpful. And so, yeah, I just wanted to highlight that, because I think that in itself is such a picture of the way that you love neighbor. You're loving Vanessa. I don't know if she's read it. She should. Let me go and make this viral and tag her in it.
I've checked a couple times just to see if she's liked it. She hasn't yet, but
yeah. But then it helps us. It helps us to come alongside the Heathers and the Vanessas in this world. And so, again, thank you for that. But yeah,
we forget, we just forget that those things make a big difference, right? And that sometimes it's just literally being there. I'll try not to cry as I tell this story, but the day Stephen died, I should say the day I found out he died, you came over, and I don't know what else was going on in your day, but you came over and you didn't say much. And I'm telling you that now as a compliment. I'm not saying that as a bad thing. You came and you hugged me, and I cried, and we sat, and I don't even remember if we really said much, honestly. I know you prayed at one point, but like just having you physically there made a huge difference. And I think that, people forget that. And I imagine people looking inward at her loss and thinking, well, how hard could it be? I mean, she lost her husband and her daughter, but they've got plenty of money, and somebody else will do this and pay for that and take care of it. And it's like, man, after loss, none of that matters at all, and that's what you need, is your people to love you and care for you. And so, when I sit down to write, a lot of times it just kind of flows out. It's just a random mess of stuff. And sometimes it stays in my journal, and sometimes I'm writing and I'm like, this has to be shared. Like, I have to post this. And that was one where I think I wrote it, edited it, and posted it like within an hour. I mean, it was just like, this needs to go out right now. Because I really felt for her. And I just imagined her as a person, right? A human, a daughter of God, just like me, regardless of how big her house was and how many cars they owned. She still lost her husband suddenly, and that was a shared emotion that I couldn't help but pick up on. And so, I guess just losing Stephen put me in a place to recognize other people's loss and be sympathetic to it, with her and with others, and be willing to guide people through that. And now, like, looking towards the future and looking towards helping people to see that, like, the heaviness of grief, the day-to-day, I can't breathe, it's all I think about, it does go away, and it does get easier. It changes. It's not, ever really gone, but it changes over time, and you do find hope and happiness and love, and those things, are still there. And again, because God doesn't want us to stay sad forever. I do believe he has a bigger plan for me and Vanessa Bryant and everybody else. So, I think that there is a coming out of this and then making meaning of it. So I don't necessarily have all the answers, but I know that I'm meant to share and to help other people as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, because I'm a pastor, I feel like I have to highlight this, and not to be uber spiritual about it, but it's part of our hope and part of the reason why I think you write the way you write. You have a certain hope, and because you said it, like, not everything will be sad forever, right? God is in the business of turning things, one day making things sad untrue, right? That's the story of the gospel, that while yes, we live in the reality of brokenness, that's not how it's always going to be. And that's not a blanket statement to sort of like, yeah, whatever, your grief is just whatever. No, it's a grieve, because we can grieve in a way where we don't have to despair over it. We can grieve in a way where it's not hopelessness. We can grieve it in a way where we accept this reality. But at the same time, we understand that God is up to something, and that we don't have to just wait till the end for God to make things good. God calls us to participate in that, making sad things untrue now, right? That we don't just wait around for God to take us to heaven one day, but instead that God calls us to participate in what we like to say, his redemptive work here, as we pray, in heaven as it is on earth, right? Or on earth as it is in heaven. It's through our callings, through our vocations, that we can participate in what God is trying to, trying to do what God is doing here, and now. Well, Heather, I'm deeply grateful for you and your work and the work of others just like you to help us fight mental health and suicide prevention in the church and in the culture. And I think it's also important to say that for any of those who are listening and are interested in resources, I know you have tons of resources. We have resources, people that we can that you can talk to. So again, reach out to somebody, reach out to us. We can help get you the help that you need. We have resources and we have people available. We can provide those for you. Anything that you want to add on that front?
I think it's important to know that, if you are in a unsafe place mentally, get immediate help. And if you just need help long term, get that as well. And having seen someone through it, I would encourage those who are supporting someone in that time to get help as well. And not wait and not, put it off, to know that, like, God's also trained up counselors to help us through tough times. All of us have these vocations for a reason. And so, lean into that and know that, it will get better, but it's okay to lean in for help in the meantime. And I hope that, that someone is able to see the hope through this message, to know that, we're not always we don't always get to choose our calling. We don't always get to pick our ministry or our unpaid vocations, but that, God's still there. He's still using it.
Yeah, it's definitely ministry. Well, thank you for sharing your life with us. We are, gosh, we need to talk about these things. And so I'm so grateful for your time and your words and even your wisdom. And I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry for how, the way your story has gone in this direction, and you didn't choose this. But I'm also grateful that that God is using it. Not that your life has to be a lesson for us, but that God is working in and through it. So thank you for your honesty. We're a better church. We're a better community. We're better people. Those around you, I'm sure, because of what God is doing in and through you, Heather. So thank you. I want to end in prayer, and then to those who are tuning in, thank you for being with us. I'm going to pray, and then we'll be done. Let's pray. Father, we praise you as the ultimate restorer, peacemaker, comforter, healer. Thank you for the good gifts that you extend to us through Heather and others like her. We ask that you use them to extend grace to people throughout our community and to our city. Please give them joy in knowing that they are reflecting your image, and give them grace to push back against the physical, the mental, the emotional effects of sin and of the fall. Lord, give them wisdom and integrity in all of their vocation. Bless them that they might be a blessing to others. Provide for them that they might provide for others. Make them a sign that points to your future restoration. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, friend.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.